I would like to inform you that this session will be recorded for those who cannot join. So this is the second Inspire Student Alumni Roundtable of the year, and it's dedicated to the gender field. So we have 3 panelists with us, and we will delve into the challenges and the opportunities to work in this field. So we have Karen-Dayana Chica Gómez, who is MDEV former student, graduated in 2022. She's a young professional and activist with experience at UNESCO, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and the Inter-Parliamentary Union, where she's currently working as a consultant in a project to promote gender equality in politics. Then we have Miriam Engeler, which is also a former MDEV student, graduated in 2020, and she's a public sector consultant at Syspons in Berlin, a consulting firm which supports public institutions, federal ministries, foundations, and non-profit organizations in maximizing their positive social impact. And then we have with us Maria Helene Vandoni, who is a former LLM student, graduated in 2020, and she's a qualified lawyer with interdisciplinary knowledge on human rights, racial discrimination, and minority issues. She has extensive work experience in the UN system, prior within the UN Human Rights Office, and now at the ILO, where she's focusing on indigenous people and racial equality. So thank you for accepting our invitation, and I will now pass on the word to Kevin from the Career Service that will moderate the session. So please enjoy this roundtable.
Thanks, Juliet, and hello to everyone joining us here. I think there are people online, and hello to Miriam and Karen. And Maria. So, I'm Kevin from the Career Services. I'll be asking the questions today. I'm observing as we're getting started, there are no men who have decided to attend the session, which is unfortunate, actually. I don't think so. Yeah, probably they should be here, most importantly. So, but thank you to those of you who came. So, we'll start with kind of asking the same question to 3 of you here. So we can get a better idea of what your career has been like in general. So we'll start with Karen, assuming you can hear me, but each of you can answer the same question. So I'd like to know, how did you end up working in the gender field? Did you have some knowledge in gender studies prior to your professional experience? So whether from your studies or from somewhere else? And what do you feel has prepared you best for your current position? That's a lot of questions, but maybe we can start with, how did you end up working in the gender field? I don't know where to look for Karen, I suppose, in the camera. But Karen, if you can hear me, go ahead. Karen, did you hear my question? Perhaps. Maybe we'll start with you, Maria, while they sort it out. So how did you end up working in gender studies?
Okay, so for me, when I finished the LLM in 2020, I was very lost and confused. I didn't know really what to do. For me, myself, I felt I didn't really have much relevant experience in human rights and international law. I mean, I had the LLM, but previous to that, I had worked as a lawyer in a law firm in Argentina, and I had done some volunteering work. So I was looking for internships in human rights here, especially in Geneva, so I could stay. And I began with an internship at OHCHR in the racial justice team. This team was created after the death of George Floyd, where the Human Rights Council mandated OHCHR to write a report on racial discrimination and systemic racism against Africans and people of African descent. And so I worked in that. Then I was able to continue with a consultancy in the same team for 2 more months. And then after that, I worked at the permanent mission of Costa Rica as an intern, and that also gave me a bit more experience with the UN system because I was working on UPRs, on the Human Rights Council, and then after that I worked in, I went back to OHCHR, but in a different team, in the civil society team. So we were working directly with the Human Rights Council. And then after that, I was thinking whether to stay there or looking for other opportunities. And then the opportunity to work at the ILO on indigenous peoples and racial equality came up. And that's why I ended up in this job, because the connection with my previous, my first internship and the consultancy on racial discrimination really was very connected with my current work now. Of course, now I work on labor law and more a broader sense of racial equality. It's not just the Africans and people of African descent, it's broader, and now it's also indigenous peoples. Just also to add that when I was doing the LLM, I focused my LLM thesis on indigenous peoples and the issue of minorities within minorities. So even though I was very confused after graduating, I kind of knew that I wanted to work on minority rights and probably also indigenous peoples. Of course, the path took me a bit on a more specific side, but then now I think with all these things, I was able to end up working on what I wanted.
And maybe just to clarify before we go on, so it sounds like you came into the work through a human rights path, but also through a racial discrimination path. Mm-hmm. Is there a gender lens or element to your work specifically, whether now or previously?
Yes. So through the internship at OHCHR on racial discrimination, and now also on indigenous peoples and racial equality, I always apply an intersectional approach. So we always take gender into consideration, and of course, because I work in the gender, equality, diversity and inclusion branch at ILO, gender is very important for us, and in my research and all my work, gender is always considered, and especially more focused on the impacts on women.
Okay, yeah, I think it's important to know that even if gender isn't in your title or specifically, it can be a part of your work, yes, you know, that you're doing. Karen, I hope you can hear me this time. So over to you. How did you end up working in the gender field and or being involved in that work? And was there something that helped you prepare for this kind of work in your previous jobs or in your studies?
Hi, thank you so much. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Sorry, I have some connectivity issues, but now I'm back. First of all, thank you for giving me the space to share with the students. I'm sure some of them are very curious to know how to end it here, because I feel like when you are entering the gender field, it's not something that you come up, like you wake up in the morning and you think, yes, I'm working in this particular field and I'm going to work this precisely. And I think it's important for me, at least how I ended up here, is through different experiences that I had throughout my career. And first of all, I organized and I founded a project in Ecuador with young students for 8 years now. I've been working on that for 8 years with students, teaching about simulations on modern United Nations, for them to learn a bit more about the world, politics, education, human rights, women's rights. And I think that's something also that influenced me to think that this is a path, or this is a topic that interests me. So that's one of the things that put me actually to seek for more opportunities or seek for things that will be aligned to this project as well, to create an impact in young people. And that's something that I do every year with with all my energies and all my strength, because I feel like this is very important and this creates an impact. Now we have given free conferences to students for around 700 students from public high schools and private high schools. So those kind of things also motivates me to go to this field. And then I study in my bachelor's. I also had a class about women in politics. And this class on women in politics actually also shaped a lot how I'm gonna do after this class. I started researching more about women in politics, representations, issues on, okay, there's women on the table, there's women in politics, but what about women from ethnic backgrounds? What about women who are not represented in this spaces, in this field? And I also started wondering myself, how can I make a change in that aspect? And then I think for me, started to think more about women's rights in politics. And I will also put that work in Inter-American Commission on Human Rights when I had the opportunity to work there. I was also had the opportunity to work as a rapporteurship for women's rights. So I think that's also something that keep pushing me to continue in this field. And that's something that I can say has really motivated me and keeps pushing me to think on people who are not represented in certain spaces of power, people who are not. And even, in the academia, you keep thinking on that. You keep thinking, where are the people who look like me there? Where are the professors that look like me there? So those kind of things are important for me. And, well, I'm just going to stop here.
Thanks. Yeah, it sounds like for you it's been, let's say, maybe a journey that started, you said, almost 8 years ago, or at least in your undergraduate degree. So something you knew you were passionate about for a long time. Thanks. And lastly, over to Miriam, the same question. Just how did you end up working in this sort of field of gender work, and what has prepared you for the work you're currently doing?
Thank you, Kevin. And also apologies in case you hear a lot of background noise. We have a team retreat today. My colleagues are all doing team building exercises right outside my door, and it's very loud. But if you can hear me fine. Can you hear me?
It's good.
Okay,
it's good.
Perfect.
Continue, yeah.
I think my gender journey started a little bit later than, for example, for Karen. I had always been sort of interested in feminism, but I hadn't really drawn the connection that this was also something extremely relevant in my sort of political science and public sector interest. And to me, it was before my master's. I was working or volunteering with this grassroots think tank that facilitated political discussions and workshops. And somehow I ended up moderating a panel on women's participation in peace processes in Kenya with a Kenyan peace activist. And that not only was incredibly inspiring, but it was also unlocked to me that, hey, wait, this is political. This is at the very, very heart of political issues, are questions of gender and women's participation and representation, etc. And I think because that happened right before I started at the Institute, that also really shaped my time at the Institute. And wherever I could, this was before the gender minor. I'm quite jealous that current students are able to do a gender minor, because this was something that we kept pushing for at my time. So at the Institute, I tried to take as many gender classes as I could. And I also did a study abroad semester at the Fletcher School in Boston, where they also had a professor who was specializing on gender in conflict and in humanitarian emergencies and development. So also by taking her classes, I've sort of tried to get both the high-level critical theoretical perspective that I think the Institute is really, really good at conveying. We have a lot of gender classes that really teach you to sort of bring post-structuralism, post-colonialism, all these important theoretical critical perspectives into your analysis of the world, but then also to, at the same time, take some classes that put this a little bit more into action and teach you, well, okay, now I know how to deconstruct the world. What do I do with this? And how does this help me work towards achieving a positive impact? And so after my time at the Institute, because I'd always sort of been doing conflict and gender simultaneously and at their intersections, I interned with GIZ, there's the German Development Cooperation Agency, in their peace and security, one of their peace and security teams, and did a lot of work on gender in peace and security. And so then from there, I applied to to my current job, which is in public sector consulting, as Juliette said in the beginning. But I applied specifically for the gender team, so specifically gender issues in the public sector and in the development and humanitarian sector. Although I do still also work on other topics. I don't do gender 100% of my time, but that's the specialization that I applied for and that I mostly work on.
Thanks, Miriam. I have lots of follow-up questions that I want to ask, but it reminds me that I should share with you guys, there's time for a Q&A at the end, so if you do have questions for any of them that come up, just make a note, and there's time at the end to ask your questions. So now I want to ask each of you kind of a specific question, which is more tailored to your work, and we'll start with Karen. So Karen, I understand your current work has kind of a research element to it, at least. So I wanted to ask, how does your academic background and your research work influence your current work at the Inter-Parliamentary Union, Gender and Partnership Program specifically? So kind of looking to know the confluence between your research and work and what that's like in your field.
Thank you very much. And I think this is a great question because in my case, I feel like my research is highly attached or connected to my work. My thesis was about race, class, and gender, and I did an intersectional analysis of Afro-Ecuadorian women candidates' discourses and experiences. And actually, one of the reasons that I'm not in Geneva right now is because I'm in Boston. I'm going to present my research at a Harvard conference on Afro-Latin American studies. And this part of me on politics and participation of women in politics also as well influencing me working in this field, but also because my work is related to a project that promotes the participation of women in politics. And this project is seeks to promote not just the participation of women, but also promote the participation of men MPs that are male champions as well, to give the parliament the tools for them to be more gender sensitive parliaments. And this project also, we have to create different activities to achieve the different goals that we have in terms of participation of women. And so for the important part of the project is as well to research of these specific countries, because we work with a certain amount of specific countries, and we will then apply this activity and go to this mission. 5-6 days ago, I was in Bangui, in Central African Republic. I implemented a project to a workshop on communication and advocacy with women parliamentarians, and essentially also it was to promote the work, but also give them tools to be able to communicate to their electorate, to be able to respond questions that they are normally asked when they are giving campaigns or presenting their work or presenting their activities. So I think that's also for us, it's important to know and understand their the challenges and also help and follow up with evaluation, right? So I think knowing their challenges, knowing their the different aspects of their work also helps for us to do a great job, because if we wouldn't know this, it would not be the same impact. And as well, for me, it's important to see the intersectional aspect of this, of their work as well, not just go in an idea, we're just going to implement an activity here and that's it and we're done, but rather how I can create an impact with my work to them. And I think this has helped me in my research to see what are the challenges mainly of women in politics and women that face different intersectional divides. So I think that is why, for me, my research and my different the different aspects that I have been researching for, like, now it's been 5 years that I've been researching this topic, that helps me, I think, to do my work in a way that has an impact rather than, just like, okay, we're just going to implement something and that's it. So I really think that delving more into these issues, delving more into what are these challenges that they face, what are the things that they will be needed when they go and give speeches, when they present their policies, when they present their projects of laws in Parliament. And that's something that also I think is very linked to my research and very linked to the things that I've been looking at as the experiences of candidates. What are they not there? Why and how they want to get there, and how their substantive representation influences in parliament. I'm going to stop there. I think I don't want to go back that far.
No, I think it must be very rewarding or kind of unique that I think your research that you've spent so much time on can have a direct impact or influence on the work you're currently doing. I think people who maybe focus on research a lot, there's a long distance between the research you do and the effect it has. Sometimes it's 20 years or sometimes it's several years, but it sounds like you're really able to use or put to use the research work you've done with the other projects you're working on. So it's very rewarding. I can imagine to use it like that. Well, thanks. Thank you, Karen. So Miriam, you're next. I have a question for you. You're currently working at Syspons, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, doing consultancy work. And I wanted to ask, what kind of gender consultancy issues or topics are you confronted with in your work? And maybe if you can give a little context for the type of consultancy, just for the audience, so they know,
I think that I need to start with that in order to explain what I do. I have one of these jobs where it's always awkward to explain, trying to explain what you do. So one of the sort of specialized areas in which Syspons works is monitoring and evaluation in development and humanitarian work. And so one part of what the gender work that I do is to bring gender dimensions into monitoring and evaluation. This can either mean asking how can we conduct an evaluation in a gender sensitive manner, but it can also mean what were the gender specific impacts that we want to evaluate or measure. The other part, and this is much larger in terms of my gender work, is technical expertise for projects mostly in development. So this can either mean in project design, trying to develop how a gender dimension can fit into a project. It can also mean conducting feasibility studies. For example, does this thematic area work in this specific context? What are the target groups and what are their needs or what are their priorities? And then thematic research. So for example, last year, my colleagues and I conducted a study for GIZ on intersectional dimensions of the COVID crisis in development. So it's published, it's Googleable. And for example, I wrote the chapter on women in peace and security, and the questions that we asked is what are the effects of the COVID crisis on this field and how can we point them out intersectionally. So just like I think it was Maria or Karen who mentioned earlier, this intersectional perspective is quite crucial to any gender work, I would argue, and it was also in this study quite crucial to apply this and not just focus on women as sort of a group, however defined. And then the last type of work or area of work that I do is accompanying strategic processes, and this is mostly in the context of the German political ministries or German federal ministries. One of the areas that we supported this year was to provide strategic inputs to Germany's positioning in the G7 presidency with regard to gender and development. And then another process that we are accompanying is the development of a feminist development policy, which was announced by the new government last year. And so, for example, we facilitated the civil society consultations that were at the beginning of the development of this policy. So there was quite a big process for civil society from the Global North, from Germany, and from the Global South to provide their inputs into this policy development. So I have my fingers in the different types of pots, and I think this is sort of just indicative of the kind of work that we do, which is a lot of different types of consulting. And what they have in common is that they're all geared towards exclusively public sector, so not for-profit clients, and mostly situated in the development and humanitarian field.
Okay. Thanks, Miriam. Lastly, Maria, in the room, what are the objectives and methods you've used as a legal officer in your work at the ILO to ensure racial equality when dealing with indigenous people's rights? What are the objectives and what are the methods, I think, more interesting? Yeah.
So I guess it's more about what my work is, kind of.
I mean, similar, maybe you can start with a context of that.
At my work as a legal officer on indigenous peoples and racial equality, what we mostly do is legal research. I'm currently conducting a legal research, worldwide legal research, to see the legal situation of each country on racial equality laws, indigenous peoples, migration, everything considering racial equality in the world of work. So for this legal mapping or country profiling on laws, what I'm doing is seeing what are the laws of each country on racial discrimination, what are the institutions that are directed to protect racial equality in each country, and also what are the national plans, action plans, national policies and strategies on racial equality. This is all in preparation of a report on racial discrimination in the world of work, which we hope to have ready by next year. Then we're also working on a call for papers on racial discrimination in the world of work. And for this, we are, it's an open call for papers, so with the objective of also raising awareness, also learning from different people that will submit their papers, and also using it for the report next year. And then also to have organizing a webinar for the selected papers on racial discrimination. Then as well, part of my work is drafting documents requested by different stakeholders on racial equality, indigenous peoples, intersectionality. For example, recently I prepared an answer to the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues on the diverse work that the ILO conducts on indigenous peoples. And I think that's mainly.
So if I can just ask, maybe to clarify, so when we're talking about methods used, I mean, I think ensuring racial, what is it called, we're calling equality, from grassroots activism to these sorts of things all over the world and whatnot. But at the level of the ILO, the methods used to kind of try to ensure these things are more at the legal level or the laws, national laws. These papers are designed to influence or set standards for national policy. Like the methods you're using to try to ensure this are quite high level.
Yes, it's more high level. It's not so connected to grassroots and civil society in general. This part, I guess, it's what I miss from previous work at OHCHR, which was more connected with civil society, families of victims and everything. This is more at the higher level. It's preparing reports, raising awareness. Of course, sometimes we get information requested from governments on different topics on racial equality, indigenous peoples, and then we prepare documents for them. But this is really more at the higher level. But then, of course, what we try to do when we prepare reports and information is to raise awareness, to make a change, but at the higher level.
I think, I mean, I'll put my career hat on for a moment. I think in this kind of work, you always find there's the option to work at the grassroots kind of level, which is always very engaging and often inspiring, but frustrating in different ways. And the high level, and both have their pluses, because when you're at the level of an IO, you can influence policy and people listen to you. At the grassroots, people can ignore you. And so I think there's pros and cons to both, and I guess you've gotten to see a little bit of both already. But something to think about for career is, you know, what's more interesting to you and what level you want to work at, I suppose, whatever your issue may be. But I think over to you, or no, do we have another question? Oh, yeah. Sorry. Okay. So in the next section, I won't be asking each of you guys a specific question, but I'll be asking a general question for all three of you, and you're welcome to jump in and answer and even follow each other. The idea is to have a bit more of a discussion between the three of you, and because you all have different perspectives. So we'll start with that. Just two questions, more or less. and then we'll hand over to the next part. So the first question for all three of you is, okay, so during your studies, which have been the most useful and impactful gender-related, specifically, tools and skills that you learned? Out of your studies, what were the most useful skills and tools that you learned? And this will be interesting because you all work in a little bit different side of the issue. So whoever would like to go first. Karen, Miriam, Maria.
Okay, I can start just by saying that to be honest and also realistic, I think having the word gender minor or gender in your CV helps a lot when you're trying to find jobs in this field. That's also something that I was told. If you have that already in your CV and you're interested in this, you have already achieved a step forward in this particular scenario. I think that's also very important. And other thing is listening in the classes of how diverse the field of gender studies is and the different perspectives is the one that I think the thing that helped me the most. Because of course the courses that you take, if they're gender related, are important, but also to hear your peers on different experiences and the different perspectives, I think is one of the things that helped me the most as well to learn in this field.
You guys agree? Miriam, Maria?
Yes, I completely agree. Also, learning more during your master's, undergraduate, or also at work, more about diversity, inclusion, intersectionality. I think for me, intersectionality has been key. Learning so much about intersectionality throughout all my work has been essential because it's really like a key word that you hear all the time and that you have to always apply in your work and your life as well. But then, of course, I think for me, being very structured and organized has been one of the skills that has helped me most. For my research, it's so big and I'm doing it alone. It's a worldwide research, country by country, and it's really so long that I need to be very structured. I think that's also very important.
Miriam, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would agree, especially when it comes to research. I think to echo what Karen said, learning about the diversity of gender perspectives. I think one of the things that really sort of kicked me into critical thinking about gender was just reading so much, especially when just picking my essay. I went into my first gender-related essays very naively, and the further I sort of started reading myself into different types of feminist literature, I realized, okay, this is way more complicated than I thought, but also it's much more rewarding than I might have initially assumed. So I would say not being scared to read a lot. And then something that I think the Institute offers in a rewarding way is that you can take gender classes in different disciplines. And the work that I now do is not specifically just political science or just anything, but it's mostly just data collection in different areas and with different approaches. And so taking history classes that focus on gender and taking politics classes that focus on gender and economics classes, it helps you to find the common denominator, the common sort of analytical approach, but it also helps you to sort of identify how can I go about this differently and still arrive at the same result. So this was very helpful to me. And then something that wasn't directly studies related but took place at the Institute was, I want to call it activism, maybe that's too big of a word, but I was at the Institute when the Gender and Diversity Commission was founded, and I was one of the members, and I think there were a lot of very, very relevant discussions going on, also a lot of critical discussions, and to me, at the time, I didn't realize it, but it was a first instance of trying to understand how do I formulate, or how do we, of course, this was never me alone, how do we formulate a political agenda around gender, how do we formulate gender-related demands, and how can we go about achieving them, or at least trying to achieve them, in a process that makes sense. So yeah, it wasn't academic, but it was very academic-related.
If I maybe just for Karen and for Miriam, because both of you are working in the consultancy world, I believe, at the moment. I mean, we're talking about skills and tools kind of related to your gender studies. Are there specific tools related to the gender studies you've had or the work you've done that have helped you succeed in the consultancy world specifically? Because it's a different world than, for example, the IO world or whatnot. For those students who might be interested in consultancy work, with the gender lens. Any specific skills or anything?
I think for me, because I do a lot of qualitative data collection, this was something that I talked about throughout my application process. To know how to set up a semi-structured interview, how to conduct an interview, how to organize sets of data, especially qualitative data in my case. I also did a consulting internship while I was at Geneva, even though I never actually planned to end up in consulting, it just sort of happened. Learning how to walk into a forest of data and emerge sort of with an idea and a synthesis and knowing what you want to take from the data. I don't really think any specific class helped me in that. It was more that my master thesis required me to do that, and so I had to teach myself a little bit. I don't know if your perspective is different on this, Karen.
I think I will also take the part of qualitative and quantitative analysis. Both for me has been very important as well, because I needed as well to collect data for my research, but also for the work that I'm doing. I do also a little element on that as well, but more on qualitative analysis. And also I will add to that the monitoring and evaluation. That's also something that helps in my field, especially evaluation, because we have to follow up how our project and also the activities that we do in the project impact these communities, especially like the work of the parliamentarians, the work that they do in the parliament. I think that's also something that I will add. Monitoring and evaluation is something related to my work. And I know there's some classes there. I actually didn't have the opportunity to take one of the monitoring, but I think one of that, it was in my list to take as well. And I think that's also very important when thinking on the job of consultancy as well. But I will say the critical thinking is also an element important to the work. Developing this critical thinking is something I did in the classes. I feel like classes overall help on that as well. And I just don't want to go that further, sorry.
Oh, that's perfect, yeah. Okay, so my last question before we move on, kind of for all three of you. We've talked a lot about what you've done for work and all that, but now I'm curious to hear a bit about what challenges you faced. I mean, I think working in the fields that you work in, it's never always straightforward and easy when we know that. So can you tell me maybe what are some of the challenges you have encountered in your work, either in the gender kind of field or in the racial diversity and inclusion work? Could be personally, could be in trying to accomplish your work and projects. You're nodding. Do you want to start, Maria?
Yes, sure. So this one I think is maybe a bit more personal. I mean, I think it's part of the work. So of course, for tackling racial discrimination and making the work more inclusive and diverse, of course, when you think of this, racial discrimination is systemic. It's deeply rooted in the system. So this sort of work, you have to really change the system, and for this it's very hard. And as part of our work, when we want to do is change this, we sometimes see that the change is not there, and especially now when my work is more at the higher level, then it's more research, it's more drafting papers, and then here we don't really work very closely with the victims or families of victims or civil society organizations. So for that, sometimes it's very hard because at some point I feel maybe a bit more disconnected, but at the same time, I know that this part of the work is important and someone has to do it. And also something maybe a bit more personal and from the past, when I was working at OHCHR, we were having interviews with families of victims on different cases of deaths by the police in the US, in Brazil, in Colombia, and we would learn about the cases before the courts, and then now you hear about whether there's been any news on these cases, and they haven't advanced. So also for me that is very motivating at some point, and I need to continue thinking that the work that I'm doing will make a change, and that should be my motivation to work harder. But sometimes it can be very demotivating in this sense. So for me, that's the main challenges.
Miriam, Karen, I mean, anything you want to add, or perhaps a different kind of challenge you faced?
I think I can relate to a lot of what Maria said. I think if you work on something that is very close to your personal convictions, that's incredibly rewarding, but it can also be firstly draining because it makes it more difficult for you to set personal boundaries around what is your work and what is your private life and your private activism, and how to separate the two. And then on the other hand, it's also incredibly frustrating if maybe personally you think something should go further than it's actually possible to go. And I want to add another challenge which goes in completely different direction. So I don't know, Karen, if you want to add to this first and then we do another one, or if I should just say it.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I think that gender is just starting to be recognized as a field of expertise. And I think that in some areas, and I'm not even talking about my current job, it's just an observation of the sector, you still have to argue for your own expertise, or you have to argue that gender is a relevant expertise and it is a relevant element to bring into a context. And I think the Institute is now starting to also reflect this. Like Karen, like you said, it helps to even be able to put gender as a specialization on your CV, because that already shows that this is a topic that is worth specializing in. But the professionalization of gender is just beginning, although I think Professor Prugo has made some critical observation of that as well, which is also much appreciated and should be taken into account.
Oh, sorry.
Karen, just waiting for you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. I think, first of all, what I was going to say is that it took me 5 applications within the gender partnership program to be there what I am right now. It took me 2 years to work in the Inter-Parliamentary Union to get to the job that I am now. Working in gender is not easy. And I know that my job is very specific in the sense of like it aligns with my research and work, but I think it's also worth emphasizing that it's competitive as well, and that's also one of the challenges. I think it's something that I think is important to recognize in this field, and also something about challenging in my work specifically now is the fact that when working with Parliament, things sometimes can be a bit slower than you think it will be. And even you think sometimes that they are the shapers, that they have a big influence in certain things. It's a bit sometimes disappointing, or like gives you less hope when you see like you organize events with male parliamentarians, or they don't show up probably, or they do not all participate. I think those are the kind of things that also discourage me sometimes, or like the fact that it's a slow process, and you want to get things done, you're hyped, you're motivated, but sometimes those kind of like little things influence. And I think it also goes in hand. What was mentioned before, that sometimes you want to create real impact, and sometimes it might be slow. But overall, women parliamentarians who are the ones who inspire me still to continue giving my best, because they are awesome. That's all.
Thank you, guys. And if you want to add anything else, please go ahead. Just to summarize, I'm not an expert in any of these subjects, but it sounds like, whether we're talking about racial equality or about gender issues, both of these things I feel like are, let's say, outside the established system of power in the world. I'm no academic, that's what it sounds like to me. And so the challenges seem to be like, it's really hard to work against the established system, and whatever that is, racial issues or gender issues, and change can be slow, or change can seem like it's not happening, and that can be frustrating. So just trying to summarize sort of what I'm hearing, but yeah, anything you want to add on all these points? Otherwise, we'll move on to Juliet. No?
I think on the question of power, I think if you take it seriously, then gender work is power critical work, and at its heart is to question all structures of power. and at the same time you're working in a structure of power that accords the job to you. And I think that's uniting these two things is very challenging, also, just like Karen said, and trying to negotiate the degree of impact that you're willing to achieve and sort of the compromises that are involved in that. It's a question of how much of the system can we change at one time, in the short term, in the long term, etc. So yeah, just to add a little bit of extra nuance to your observation, but I share it.
Thank you, guys. Thanks. All right, Juliet, over to you.
So we will now open the floor to questions. So please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions to our panelists. Yes, please.
Hi. My question is actually like open to everyone. So, is the knowledge of quantitative research methods given more weightage in the gender field, or like if someone is just trained in the qualitative research methodology, like how does it work exactly?
Whoever wants to answer can just open your mic and go ahead. Karen, Miriam, or Maria. Was the question clear, by the way? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Just briefly on that, and thank you for that question. I think that quantitative research methodology is very important for the gender field. It's not hugely aligned, as I said, to my work right now, but it does create a huge impact when it comes to you want to build knowledge in numbers specifically. For instance, I used to work in the data collection in my organization that I'm now, Inter-Parliamentary Union, and collecting that data is important, and it creates all the knowledge now that you find in Parline. That's the name of the website, on women in politics, different specialized bodies in the parliament. So I think this is a huge contribution that we're doing in the different fields of research. That I think that's why I feel it's important. Yes.
Yeah, it's similar for me. It's not immediately relevant always to my work. When I do quantitative data analysis, I usually do it in a tandem with colleagues who specialize on that. But I think there's a huge gender data gap. We are missing a lot of really critical data on gender that just currently isn't being collected. I'm not talking about my job, but broadly speaking, about the system. And I think it's going to take a lot of people that are really smart in numbers and people with a strong quantitative profile in the coming years to work on closing that gap. And I also, from what I can say that I observe about the job market, not that I'm an expert, but I do think this is going to become more relevant as gender becomes more established in the qualitative research area, etc. It's people and sort of summits and political agendas, etc., are increasingly focusing on how can we close the gender data gap. So I definitely think qualitative profiles are equally as important.
Yes, I agree on the importance of both. I think for data, it's there's also, as there is a gap on gender data, there is a gap on disaggregated data, so gender, race, ethnicity, everything. So in that sense, I agree on the need for my research. The quantitative part of data, it's very relevant still. We're not working on that. It's a big part, and next year will have to be part of our work. And so numbers are very important to show that whether to make an impact and to make a difference, because then we can know more of the reality of the situation with the numbers. So yes, I agree on the importance, but of both, definitely.
Yes, please.
Yeah, gender is not a job, or at least it's not considered as enough to be something like a job. And it's more like a framework or something that we really need to consider to work. How would you go, or how did you go from having that as a specialization to something that you're working every day to, oh, now I need to find a job, and because it's not considered as enough to be a job, I need to find like a whole purpose where I can attach that. I can attach a gender to that. So how did you work it out? I'm sorry, it's for everyone. So feel free to answer.
You can start in the room if you want to add something.
Yes. So I mean, for me, gender is really not my like specific area of work. Of course, gender is applied in my work every day. But what I think is when you think of what job you would like to get related with gender, there are so many things related with gender. So jobs that will work on gender equality or women empowerment or violence and harassment, or even works that are more specific on data gathering and all those things. I'm not sure if I can. Of course, on racial discrimination and applying gender on that, applying a gender approach on that. So,
Karen, Miriam? First come, first serve. Whoever wants to go first. It's okay.
Karen,
Sorry, I didn't find the unmute button. Sorry. I think I will also complement what Maria said, because I think it's in every word you can also relate the gender field. I feel like, as I said at the beginning, you don't just, when you're looking for jobs, you just don't go on works on gender field. You go on what is interesting to you, that it's attached to gender studies, or because I feel like it can be women's rights, it can be LGBTQ plus rights as well, it can be political participation, representation. And for me particularly, I specialized at the Institute of Gender was my minor, but I did the major was in migration. So actually I've been doing kind of like both things while working as well. So migration and political participation, women, and for both I've been applying a gender lenses of this. And when I was starting to look, looking for jobs, or even researching about it, I was like, what type of research I'm going to do in my master's thesis? I was like, I like both different topics. Which one I choose? And I think there's like, there's difference between migration and political participation. So I wanted to properly include both of them, but I feel like both can be related to gender. You can also research about refugees, the inclusion of refugees with the lens of finding what is it about refugees for women who are cross-bordering, or different issues that can be attached. So I feel like it's very big as well in the sense of what you want to make out of it. And I think that's also something that is beautiful as well, because you give yourself a space to feel like you can work in this field, but also not just like in a gender particular work. And I seen also while looking for jobs, there's not much work that says gender equality. There will be some, but UN Women, there will be some in UN Women and some specific organizations, but I don't feel like there's like thousands of jobs that mention gender equality in this description.
I completely agree with that, and I also can really empathize with the frustration of trying to find a gender job and just submitting endless applications. And I did it similarly to what Karen did. I also always had another area of thematic sort of interest, which was in my case power and conflict. That was my major, and I also did gender in and of itself, and gender as part of that larger topic. And so I also, similarly to Karen, I asked myself, how can I integrate both these things? I wrote my thesis on women's representation and peace mediation. So again, trying to cover both of these areas. And then there were also past positions in which I didn't have a gender position. It wasn't gender related, but I tried to find gender aspects to it. And I tried to ask, hey, can I do something on gender in this regard? And just to sort of have something to show for how you've worked on gender in the past, because as you said, gender isn't a job yet, or not always recognized as a job. So in addition to showing that, I read all this theory at university, having some sort of professional project, whatever it might have been, to show and say, here is an instance where I developed something on gender, and you're able to put it on your CV, and in an interview, if someone asks you, give us an example of how you've worked on gender, you can tell them a little bit about that project. So if it's at all possible in your job, try to push or internship or whatever it might be, if you can sort of have a little gender side project or intersectionality side project or racial equality side project, again, we don't want to always limit it to gender, that can be very helpful as sort of a coping strategy, I want to say.
Thank you.
So I would say, since we are running out of time, maybe we can start the informal discussion. So if you want to approach near our little coffee break, and so that we can talk in a more informal way with the panelists. So thank you to the panelists and to the students for the fruitful discussion we had today. And also stay tuned for our next events. In March 2023, there will be an entire month dedicated to alumni and alumni, so new opportunities to meet former students. And to know more, you can follow us through the website or to social media platform. So a round of applause, I would say. And please approach, take a drink, and we can have a more informal setting now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are Karen and Miriam going to be offered drinks as well?